Hello, and welcome to the Northern Iron podcast. This week, I am joined by Paul Brogan from Extinction Rebellion Northern Ireland. Extinction Rebellion describe themselves as a decentralised, international and non-partisan movement using non-violent direct action and civil disobedience to persuade governments to act justly on the climate and ecological emergency. So, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your involvement in Extinction Rebellion?
Yeah, no problem. My name is Paul Brogan. I did a PhD in electrical engineering, renewable energy integration. So my personal drive has been towards sustainability, and I've been working kind of more or less in the industry for 15 years. And certainly, like the thing that happened in 2019, I saw the big protests in London, and it really brought home to me that like the thing that clicked in my head when I heard the description was like I thought this could work. Because, I've been working at university doing research, and after 10 years, the same things were being said. The same things are like, oh, the next big thing is this. And that had been the same thing for 10 years. Similarly, with heat pumps and solar panels, I was installing them in North Ireland in 2008. I was like in my mid-20s, and people were like, oh, we're here, we're really doing something about climate change. And 15 years later, nothing had happened. I certainly would have felt that I should have worked within the system, and I was working within the system and trying to do all the right things. And I realized that 15 years had passed. We'd made basically, or I shouldn't say we'd made no impact, but 3% per year emission rise had gone on and on and on. Admittedly, that might have been 4 or 5% if it wasn't for efficiency savings and some degree of awareness, but 3% per year has been consistent. And so I realized that for all of the work I was doing within the system, that wasn't really enough. And actually, real change nearly always has to come from without. So that urgency then, given the fact that there had been non-action by the government, I think I sort of realised that a degree of direct action was necessary in order by the direct action.
And where do we stand in the climate crisis now?
I would say on the precipice, sometimes people are saying, we have 10 years to solve the climate crisis. Now, that's people remembering from a pre-pandemic, pre-2020. In 2019, we had sort of 10 years to solve the climate crisis. We've wasted 3.5 years at this stage, and we haven't improved the situation. I know some people at the start of COVID were like, oh, look at the reductions in CO2 emissions, but we've caught up. That was a blip. And the same thing happened after 2008 financial crisis. So, I'm certainly of the opinion that we are the potential to, make subtle changes around the area, continue life and progress as we kind of know it, is that ship has sailed. What we need to do now is start taking emergency action to prepare for what we're dealing with.
And what emergency action do you think needs taken?
So it's always bad when we go like, well, what do you need to do? And it's like, oh, what do you do is set up a committee, right? That's how, whenever people are kicking the ball down, kicking the can down the road. But certainly Extinction Rebellion's third demand was that we should have a people's assembly on the climate emergency. And then we should then act on that, on their recommendations. I think that's the first thing. Extinction Rebellion had never been a solutions organization. We're a pressure organization. We need to start acting like it's real. We have to start acting like it's an emergency. We shouldn't be in a position where we think we can hope that this will go away, because it's not going away. What do we need? We need the essentials. We need to start prioritizing the essentials as a society. So those things are, food, like access to food. Where's our food coming from? Water. So both clean water to our houses, and how do we deal with sanitation? Access to energy. So preferably from clean resources, so electricity, and decarbonizing our energy system. And security is important as well. So, these are, just always like Pavlov's triangle, the triangle of needs, basically. So you want to make sure that you've met that base level. I'm very aware of my life that I have been late to the party. People have been trying to tell me things for years, and I've only caught up later. So, that's where you need to have this group of people getting together and coming up with solutions.
In July, with all the heat waves, this is like almost more proof that people are starting to actually recognise and be impacted by the effects of climate change. How far do you think we're from total catastrophe?
I mean, like this is just me personally. From my reading of the situation, is that by 2030, very bad things will have happened. What we're experiencing now, like so, this year is being somewhat exacerbated by the start of an El Nino. El Nino is an oscillation in the Pacific Ocean. So it either is during a heating phase, a cooling phase, or a neutral phase. So it'll tend to bump up world temperatures by maybe half a degree or a little bit more. So we had a strong El Nino in 1998, which bumped up world temperatures quite high. Then for the next 10 years, they kind of stayed at that really high point up until about 2008. So some of the, climate change or global warming deniers, because we went from calling it global warming in 98 to calling it climate change in 2008. These are the sorts of things that we were doing at that time when it was critical for us to take this seriously. We were chasing our own tails. But so what this year will do, and actually more so next year, so this is the start of El Nino. So this summer is probably going to be a bit hotter. Next summer will be the whopper. That's when it's going to, so we could probably expect another half a degree global temperature warming, maybe locally an extra 3 degrees. And that's a big deal when you go from 47 to 50 degrees, or even 40 degrees to 43 degrees. The death rate, the heat stress increases effectively exponentially. So yeah, this year will probably be a whopper. But that's probably our new normal for that'll probably take us up to 2030. And by the time we get to 2030, we're likely to have another 1 or 2 El Ninos. I mean, my own personal, from looking at some data, feeling is that we're probably the North Pole will probably break up in the next 5 years. Before then, I'd put that out. I'd wager that by 2030, that there will be a summer where the North Pole has melted, and that will really shift weather patterns. So these sorts of things are absolutely catastrophic. But you don't really hear it being discussed.
Is there anything that could be done before that?
Yeah, so I mean, the things that we need to do, this is getting back to the basics, is so we saw in Britain there were heat banks over last winter because the cost of fuel had gone through the roof. People were were being cut off, were having their heat cut off. So during the winter they had, and also Britain has the worst housing stock in Western Europe, Western and Northern Europe. We have incredibly poorly insulated houses, very poor quality housing, both old housing and new housing, and people couldn't afford to heat them. And if you get too cold, you die. So they had to have heat banks. Probably need to have something similar. Though that's what will be needed in the likes of in Europe. So one of the problems with our individualistic culture, which is being promoted, is that we all want to sit in our big houses with our air conditioning turned up high and bask in the coolness. But that's not going to work because the power system can't support that and it'll break. And then whenever that breaks, what do you do? Your house slowly climbs towards 40 degrees centigrade or higher. So it's get together, collectivize, have somewhere that you can ride this out together. Because I think humans are fundamentally a social animal, and we solve problems when we work together. What we need is collective action. So that's why we say that we need to shift to what we call like a war footing with climate change. So during a war, entire economy of a country is basically shifted to dealing with that problem of being invaded, because if you are invaded, there is no more country. Simple as that. And then that's what we need to sort of do. So in the same way that people had to shelter in bunkers during the Blitz in Britain and during the bombings in Kyiv and so on, then that's what we'll have to do during particularly cold periods, particularly hot periods, because it's that or die.
Do you think Northern Ireland will be affected by this?
So North Ireland and Ireland are, and to a lesser extent Britain, they're one of a select few places that you want to be. They're kind of like lifeboat areas which aren't going to be too affected by climate change we'll complain because we'll have droughts of maybe 4 weeks or 6 weeks, and it'll hit 32 degrees here or 35 degrees, and they'll be like, this is unprecedented. But when we're hitting 35 degrees, Europe ain't hitting 45 or 50 degrees. Even Southeast England, typically Ireland's about 10 degrees cooler than a heat wave in London. So last year London hit 41 degrees C and Ireland hit 31 degrees C. And that 10 degrees is a big difference. makes a big difference. So because Ireland's in this sort of interesting point that we're warned by the Gulf Stream coming up from the Caribbean, and that's probably going to get weaker has been getting weaker, and will possibly get weaker and collapse, which would make, the British Isles cooler at the same time global warming rises. So then so the two things balance out. We stay at a relatively good comfort zone. That isn't a reason not to do something. We have, if you're living in Ireland, then you've been given a winning ticket, shall we say. That doesn't mean you should sit on your hands. That means you should work to provide hospitality for other people. I think that's the only moral argument. If you have wealth, then you should. If you have wealth and you've made your own life sufficiently comfortable, your next objective should be to help others. And I think that's what Ireland should do. It'll mean a lot of changes. From farming practice, land use, tolerance and education.
And you said one of the consequences of the island of Ireland being the least and last affected place, that people could actually end up moving to the island of Ireland. So what challenges could we face as a result of people moving here?
I think there's two challenges. One I would say is from rich people, and one is from poor people. So the challenge of rich people moving here is one of the things that certain billionaires and so on have done is bought up vast tracts of land for instance, in Africa, where they've gone these bits here are going to be less affected by climate change. So they can buy up hundreds of thousands of acres. And that then means that the people who were living there get pushed off the land. Any number of billionaires whose names you don't know could just go and buy up thousands of acres, which means then that's not available to thousands of people or hundreds of people. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is people who are having to migrate here. When we have people arriving here who've been driven out of their homes by climate change, and we could be talking about people in France and Spain and Italy, they're places you go on holiday, but unfortunately when they have to sell up their houses, the houses aren't worth very much anymore. So they've lost their net worth, their asset. If someone burns down your house and you haven't got insurance, you're going to lose a lot of money. And all of a sudden, you know what it means to be, impoverished. So those are the people. It's not just the kind of the images that the press would like to, celebrate Braverman's kind of implications of who we're going to send to Rwanda. It's not those type of people. It's, it's everybody, and also those people.
The Northern Ireland Environmental Statistics Report was released in May 2023. The level of public concern about the environment issues were actually quite high, with 80% being very or fairly concerned about the environment. Is this a positive shift in attitudes?
It's definitely a positive shift in attitudes, but talk is cheap, ideas is cheap. That will be my opinion. Action is what matters. It's great to have support, but what we need is people, on the streets, putting pressure on politicians, putting pressure on business. What we need is root and stem transformation. So those small steps are so much more important than attitudes. What's important is the outcome. But what's the product of your opinions and ideas?
The Extinction Rebellion, one of their demands is to go beyond politics. And that's well and said in England. But here, politics is such a big part of life. It divides so many people. How do you think this would work in Northern Ireland?
What the beyond politics means is set up a citizen assembly, which is a little bit like having a jury for the same way you have a jury for a trial. They sit down, they listen to the evidence of both sides, and they make a decision. We feel that's the only just way that, or we can deprive someone of their freedom, is to put them in front of a jury. And that's what we're asking to do. So citizens assemblies like that, you have a jury of 100 people. You spend a few weeks, often just weekends, so as long as you think, it could be say 4 or 5 weekends in a hotel. You sit down, you discuss your presentations, you have discussions, and at the end of it, you come up with recommendations. The parties inform how it's implemented, how it's how and when it's done. So you need the parties to sign off on the idea that we will have a citizens' assembly, and then subsequently you have to have the big parties to implement the recommendations. And preferably they agree to implement them beforehand, not afterwards. Because what often happens is they'll say, yeah, we'll do a citizens' assembly, look how progressive and forward-looking we are. It comes back with recommendations that they don't like, and then they scrap it. You need the politicians to approve the assembly, And ideally, you say, well, we will sign off on the outcomes before citizens' assemblies can be undermined by politicians. We can work out ways to circumvent this. So if you ask the wrong questions, that's one of the ways of undermining it. So, for instance, the Conservative government did have a citizens' assembly back, I'm not sure it was 2018 or 2020, but the question was, what can individuals do to change their habits to help, mitigate climate change? This personal change stuff is, pardon my language, crap, right? At the end of the day as well, your personal consumption is about 20% of the problem or 30% of the problem. On the power system, residential consumption is between 20 and 30% of overall electricity usage. We don't realize that, particularly in our data centers, but manufacturing and commerce consume effectively twice as much power, electrical power, as the consumer. But you would think the solution to the electricity problem is to put solar panels on every rooftop. If every house in the UK and Ireland was self-sufficient in terms of electricity, you've solved 20 to 30% of the problem.
People can't do, so if them doing something individual themselves to help climate change isn't totally effective, what can they do?
There was a former head of Greenpeace, is Kumi Naito. I've heard a really good talk by him in Belfast back just before lockdown. He said personal change is a good place to start, but it's a bad place to finish. First thing to do is organise. Yeah, so it's whether or not it's joining groups like Extinction Rebellion. Hey, you want to jump in the deep end, just stop oil, Sea Shepherd, crack on. But other things as well is, yes, talking to your local representatives. I mean, obviously you need to inform yourself first. So I suppose the first thing is inform yourself of what's going on so that if someone challenges you to the point, you can answer some of the questions. Certainly start by making personal change, but those personal changes should enhance your life. They shouldn't, this should not be a hair shirt or, it shouldn't be a self-flagellation thing. Certainly should not build, an egotistic them and us idea in your head or annoy other people. But once you've done those basic things, then go to, then talk to your local representative, see how important it is to them, explain to them that it's important to you, then look for local organizations. So yeah, like the Extinction Rebellion are around, but even the grassroots community groups as well and so on. Learn about the principles of community organizing and pressure groups. And if you want to go a bit further as well, you can think about your local energy kind of cooperative type of things. So rather than putting solar panels on your roof, it's better to get together with groups of people and have a combined pot. So rather than 5 people on your street spending £10,000 on solar panels, it would be much better to put that money together and spend £50,000 on a bigger project or £100,000. Yeah, that would be where I'd go with it. Do not stop at personal change. Look at what's going on. Organise with your community.
And with sort of the groups such as Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil has, ended up on news because of a lot of the things they've been doing. But Extinction Rebellion are temporarily shifting away from public disruption as a primary tactic. What's next for your group here in Northern Ireland?
Extinction Rebellion don't have a marketing budget of £100 million per year to spend on advertisements and billboards and stuff. What we have is our bodies. We have a certain amount of time. Most people are working. You have to go on your holidays. You have to take time off work. Go to London. And then it's not an easy life. It's not just going to a festival, If people are going to engage in direct action, like gluing themselves to stuff, the point is, what's the outcome? They just don't report it. So as an example, on Earth Day back in the end of April, I was over in London, Extinction Rebellion, the 4-day protest. It was all peaceful, non-disruptive, etc., etc. It received basically no coverage. It was 100,000 people marching and stuff. It's like, look, nobody cares anymore. You've been doing this for 4 years now. 100,000 people march in London. Look, it's just by the by, right? Nobody cares. That's some of the global side of things. Locally, it's a little bit different. As in, our local media isn't necessarily as cynical, I guess. And they will report things. So we were we have this protest coming up in September. So there's often a bit of a march in September. And I think that's Fridays for Future, or that's their primary thing, so the youth strikers. And we'll be supporting that. We were looking at organising a protest around Stormont. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult to schedule in days for a bit of a disruption. Unfortunately, not having a government is a problem. Not least, there's no point in the doctors and nurses striking because we haven't got a government to negotiate with or put pressure on. It's, so we have these, we have our feet somewhat tied together. But at the same time, capacity building is always important. So building your working groups, training people in non-violent direct action, and so on. So we have training days coming up. We have open meetings. So you can find us on our social media, and you can find us on our website, and so on. And that's the best way to get involved.
And there's a lot of doomer culture. I saw Roger Hallam told young people that they face annihilation. Is there any hope that you could give to young people or students, or do you think it is all doom?
My sense is that, yes, tomorrow is a worse day than today. On the descent, you can choose to do nothing and be miserable and not help other people, right? Or you can choose to enjoy today, realize today's a bit, so from a climate perspective, today's the best day of your life, and embrace that day and do everything you can to reduce the harm that's going to be caused overall by climate change. Because just because it's not getting better doesn't mean that it can't get worse, right? It can be worse. The amount of human suffering can be worse. And I think that's the answer to doomerism. Doomerism is just, I think it comes from a very individualist perspective where you already feel hemmed in by walls and you're inclined towards accepting that philosophy. And it's also a philosophy which is offered as well. I think hope is a very dangerous thing as well. People are sometimes given this binary choice. Either you can be hopeful that technology will fix the problem or other people will fix the problem. I think that's the problem with hope often, is you hope it'll just go away. But you need action. We need action from you to do things to make this hope real. So you're offered this option. Hope, where you sit around and hope someone else is going to fix the problem, or doom. There's no point in doing anything, right? Both of those don't really involve action. And that is what I think, people who are the activists or inactivists want you to choose between. And I would say there's a third option. And you can be hopeful and active, or you can be doomer, like you can accept, and that we're heading towards extinction, and be active. Just don't be inactive. That's my argument.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the episode. And that's all we have time for today. Till next time, stay tuned and we'll talk later.